right, friends, today we're going to talk about a very exciting topic, Venus's cycle and retrograde, which is going to start in the sign of Aries, move back to Pisces, and then from Pisces back to Aries. This is not a normal retrograde because it's going to hit some seriously ugly and difficult planets. So we got some trials and tribulations ahead, great life lessons as usual. We'll get into that in this video. And if you have Venus in the sign of Aries and Pisces, or you have anything in Aries or Pisces, this is going to be a prominent theme coming up. And in this video, we're just kind of going to scratch the surface of what Venus in Pisces is, get into this whole cycle of Venus's retrograde. And my hope is to make more videos as Venus makes a conjunction to Saturn, Rahu North Node, Neptune, ingress into Aries, station retrograde on its way back, hit a retrograde Mercury, come into a Cazimi conjunction with the Sun, move back into Pisces, and go through that entire process again till it's back into Aries and finally out of here. And before starting, please remember to hit like, subscribe, and comment below. This is the way the algorithms will recognize this channel, which will permit me to do more of this work, which I absolutely love. And in commenting, write your own personal experiences. I don't take those lightly. I use it as case studies, and studying these transits and these planetary symbolism, you need to gather a lot of data over time to understand how the unfoldings will be with these planets. So if you do leave a comment about your own personal experiences, I would eternally be grateful to you. And now, without further ado, let's get into Venus and Pisces. The way that I start most videos is to give you the symbolism of the planets, the house, the sign, whatever combination that we're going to use, and then merge them together to see what comes of it. I want to do something a little bit different here this time in this video. Instead of giving you the symbolism, which I'm just going to put on the side of the screen, I'm not sure what side I usually put it on, and you guys can just read that. I want to get into the mechanism behind these symbolism, which gives it its significations. So let's start with Venus. The mechanism behind Venus's function is something like magnetism. It's attracting different components to itself. And if you think about it, what Venus is doing by drawing things into itself, eliminating the boundaries and the distances that were between things. It's like having a bunch of paper clips and you have a magnet. They're all dispersed all over the table. As soon as I put the magnet on it, they all get attracted to it and they come together. They're no longer far apart the way that they were on the table. So it's creating a kind of a union and a cohesion between seemingly distinct parts and separated parts. And if you recall in other videos, I've talked about this too. Mercury brings things into relation, like at a close proximity and a distance. And then Venus is supposed to merge, unify, and connect them. So that's why I'm using this analogy, this field of interaction that's related to Venus that's magnetic, and it pulls things together and connects. It's like taking two separate distinct things where Mercury is representing that. Is like, this is you, this is me, we're friends, we're connecting in the middle. There's a kind of a duality involved in this. Mercury's dealing with sets of two, for example, or two things. Whereas Venus brings them into a union, dissolves this kind of a duality that Mercury deals with. It blends things together where the distinctness of those two different entities merge into each other. The merging of these different components into one give rise to new variations that emerge from that union, that connectivity that Venus establishes. And as an example, Venus represents creativity, beauty, and it is this, let's say, combination of colors on a canvas that's giving rise to an image. There's a third variation coming out of it by creating these interconnectivity on the canvas that's permitting this to happen. It's giving rise to new proportions and new symmetries by doing this. Venus represents what we could call it a convergent motion. And it is transformative because it's taking different entities and different components, bringing them together and creating a kind of a synthesis from their merging and their union. And this gives rise to a new state and an enriched state. So in a sense, Venus is establishing very meaningful relationship between people, between objects, and the things of the world. And from these kinds of functions, we can start to see, well, this is why Venus represents, for example, cooperation. It's talking about the way that it can harmonize different components and bring them together, not just into relation like the way Mercury does, but to actually connect and merge them into one another. There's a kind of an intimacy involved here with Venus, whereas Mercury is more impersonal because there's still a distance, there's still a boundary between the two entities in relation, whereas Venus is like connected, merged. And from this, we can see why Venus is associated to relationships, partnerships, and in general is a significator for love. And that's because Venus is able to merge different components together and weave them in a very cohesive and a beautiful way into a unit of expression. There's a sense of wholeness and oneness when all these parts come together and have that unity, that sense of wholeness comes out of it. And we also got to remember that Venus is related to the feminine principle, whereas an organizing principle, the feminine principle is about how things are internal moving, like from the exterior, things are being drawn. And Moon also has this quality. There's a receptive nature to it that it can take in. So it has a lot to do with inclusivity also. Venus and Saturn could be called the planets that are for the people. They're more democratic in nature. And this aspect of Venus has a lot to do with that inclusivity that comes with the Venus archetype. And this magnetism, this drawing in, this inclusivity also gives Venus this feeling that it's creating a sense of belonging, as well as eliminating separated parts where me and you, for example, can become a kind of an us. That's the inclusivity that Venus has. And from this sense of us, this collectivity, this inclusion, this magnetism that drew everything together, new emergences can come out of that. For example, we can have a shared experience, a collaborative experience. These are all significations that are related to Venus. So we can say that the mechanism that's making Venus a kind of a function, that magnetism, is about dissolution of boundaries, establishing connections, merging different kinds of energies and entities, and doing it in a way that it's harmonized, it is proportional, it is symmetrical, it is beautiful. So in general, it's creating a kind of a union from dispersed parts. It's bringing everything together, and we get this kind of a union from Venus. Now, let's go to Pisces and see how the sign of Pisces is functioning, what kind of function it is, and how it operationalizes different planets and as a field of interaction, what it does when something basically goes into Pisces because of its own nature, because of the kind of environment that it is, the acts that it does. But before going to Pisces, just to give a feel for what Pisces is like, let's go one sign forward. Let's go to the sign of Aries. Pisces represents the final stage in the zodiac signs, whereas Aries is the initial and the beginning stage. So Aries comes to represent the spark of life. It's a concentrated point of energy that bursts forth into manifestation. Aries, in its essence, embodies individuality and distinctness. And we've got to remember now, Pisces is operating right before this sign, which is a point of differentiation. Pisces is a space before where boundaries are drawn, the way that the differentiation process takes place in the sign of Aries. We could say that in the sign of Pisces, everything exists in its latent form. It's like a place of pure potential without focus or division. We could depict it something like a sea of endless possibilities, where multitudes exist, but without a central point or without boundaries of separation. It's encapsulating the essence of unity and limitlessness, let's say. So the underlying mechanism in Pisces is operationalizing the dissolution of boundaries. It's about the blending of form and returning things into an undivided state, let's say. For example, there's a boundary between me and you. We go into the sign of Pisces, And right away, Pisces like, I don't like this boundary and this differentiation. I'm going to destroy the differentiation between you two. And in order to do that, I need you both to lose your distinctiveness. And this process goes so deep. It's not just like, I don't want your bodies to look different, but it's like, I don't want your identities to be different. I don't want your personalities to be different. Like a droplet of water that goes back into the ocean. If I say to you, go points to a droplet of water in an ocean, you can't do that. It's just one body of water. This is what Pisces is trying to do. So by the end of it, the form will not have its discernible form anymore. The form as a potential manifested in form now goes back to a state of mere potential again. It's actually a space where distinction is suspended and all separation cease to be. It's just reduced everything back to its potential. It's merging them back into the deep sea of Pisces. And just to give you another example, let's say I have a cup and I have a sugar cube. The sugar cube is distinctly a form. It is a sugar cube. The virtue of the fact that its body, which is the cube, is giving it a sense of distinctness, right? I throw it into the cup of water, right away it starts to melt. And then if I tell you, show me where the sugar cube is, you can't do it anymore. The essence of the cube, that sweetness, which is its potential, let's say, is now merged into the water and has become one with it. This is the function of Pisces. This is what it does. And of course, Pisces is not a cup of water, is representing the vastness and the expanse of, let's say, the ocean, the expanse of the cosmic ocean, which we human beings look up and call it the space. And this vast cosmic space or this vast ocean lacks any kind of a boundary. I mean, like, take all the landscape away, it's hard to know which part of the ocean is this and which part of the ocean is that. Same with space. If we don't have any reference point, we can't point to something and say, that's there and that's there. It's difficult to do that because that differentiation and that separation in the space that's being marked by different forms is not present in Pisces. And this is so unlike the sign of Aries. And this is important to remember because Venus is going to start its retrograde in Aries, goes into Pisces, and then comes back. So we're talking about two very distinct modalities. One is trying to individuate, separate as that spark of life, as potential manifest, which is Aries. And Pisces is doing the exact opposite. It's taking the form that is manifest and dispersing it, diffusing it into the vastness and into the depth of itself. So it becomes undifferentiated. So in a sense, we could say Pisces is the precondition to existence. It's kind of like the infinite pool of all possibilities, where from this pool of possibilities, eventually something very distinct and individual will come out of it, which the sign of Aries supports, which is the sign after the sign of Pisces. But in the sign of Pisces in itself, nothing distinct yet exists. We're waiting for it. It's just a sea of potentiality. So in this way, we can see that the sign of Pisces is operationalizing the process of inclusion as incorporation. This means that the sign of Pisces incorporates everything that exists within a single vast unit, where no individual part can be separated from the whole. And it's fundamentally about dissolution. And both in terms of dissolving barriers and in terms of integrating different kinds of experiences. And experiences can include the manifestation of the form itself, our memories, different types of information, even different bodies of knowledge, identities, into an undivided space. It's just a depth that is just taking everything within it and destroying all the separation that exists, everything that separates. Like our ego and our identity is meant to distinctly define me, for example, in relation and relative to you. Me as my person, let's say I fall into Pisces as a field of interaction, is trying to disentangle all the components that has created all these separations within myself and in relation to other people. in general, we could say the sign of Pisces is like a very fluid kind of a space that can accommodate vastness, and it's kind of a container that holds everything, but nothing in there can be defined. It's an abstract sign. And if you know prominent Pisces people, they're kind of abstract people, even in their daily behavior. Like punctuality is not their forte, for example. It's something that they have to cultivate through a lifetime, let's say with a moon in Pisces. Because to have a schedule is to segment time and then to juxtapose that segmentation over space via our actions. This segmentation and this separation of time, space, and action is not something that comes to Pisces people naturally. They have to condition their mind to be able to do this. And it doesn't feel comfortable. It feels very unnatural. Whereas, let's say, moon for Capricorn, with ease, they can do this. Or especially moon in Virgo, even better at it. They love making schedules. But beyond all jokes, I wasn't joking. But let's get on with it. I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that Pisces, you can't figure out where the center is, where the margins are, how things are in relation to one another, how things are different from each other. Everything comes into Pisces to dissolve and to get incorporated, and as potential, not as distinct things, discrete things. All the discrete and different things come to be part of the whole. That is the vast ocean of Pisces, that body of water where each droplet cannot be differentiated anymore. And this is one of the reasons why Pisces is, for example, often associated to compassion and empathy, for example, as well as understanding. And because Pisces is saying that we're able to perceive without barriers. Empathy, what does it require me to do? Stop seeing things through my eyes and my experiences and walk a mile in your shoes, for example. How do you experience it? So it's like me dissolving this ego identity and this conditioned way of seeing the world through my eyes, step across that border and boundary of myself into your world to understand your perspective and your experiences. And the act of compassion is like I'm seeing you as something that's an extension of myself. I'm extending that grace that I would give to myself to someone else. For the mistakes that I make, now I'm going to allow someone else to make those same mistakes. That inclusivity and erasing the boundaries is what Pisces does, which allows these qualities like compassion and empathy and understanding to come forth. In a sense, another picture that we can draw of Pisces is like the womb of all creation. You know, all the potential already exists there, and it's going to take its form in the sign of Aries. But as a container that holds that potentiality, it's Pisces. In a way, Pisces is kind of a paradoxical place of endings and beginnings. It's an ending because it's a return to unity. It's a place where it disassociates us from our individuality, and it is a dissolution of form. And yet, at the same time, is a place that is required for beginnings and new initiations. Because it's from this boundless, limitless ocean of potentiality that a new being and a new form can emerge. We could say Pisces operationalizes the mechanism of infinite possibilities from which the entire cycle of life can be born. And I'm laughing because it's abstract. But you know what? Existence is abstract. The universe is abstract. It's like we always talk about things that exist and what happens to them. We rarely question why do things exist at all. Just where has it all come from? This is taking us back to that Piscean notion, which is very abstract. And we just have to have this willingness to play with words a little bit, be metaphorical and be poetic in order to understand some of the symbols in astrology and what existential mechanism are they describing? What is their function? So I'm trying to be as brief as possible because we still have so much ahead. But let's just say this is the kind of feel that we can give to the sign of Pisces. Let's jump right into when Venus is in Pisces. And the reason why I wanted to give these kinds of explanation is to show you that in general, Venus has great amount of resonance in the sign of Pisces. Venus is trying to connect things and merge things and unify things. And there is no distinction and differentiation in the sign of Pisces. So it's supporting this magnetism of Venus. It's almost as if it's using Venus to take all the droplets and to merge them so that we have this vast ocean. It's kind of like when Venus gets into Pisces, Venus's job is also done too, because it's like, oh my God, I'm in a space where things are automatically merging and coming together, and they're in a state of ultimate union. So I'm either going to do a great job here, or I can just go on vacation and just let things do their things. And of course, Venus is exalted in Pisces. And by virtue of this, in general, we give a great signification to Venus in Pisces. However, even with exaltations, there are life lessons. It doesn't mean that everything unfolds perfectly without effort and without suffering. So these are some of the points that we're going to touch on today. And this is not a normal Venus and Pisces situation. As I said earlier, Venus is going to encounter the malefic Saturn, the malefic North Node Rahu, the distorting, illusion-making, insane-making Neptune. And then it's going to go into a sign where it is in its fall, which is the sign of Aries. And then when it actually comes back into the sign of Pisces, is accompanied by a debilitated Mercury. It's a very complex transit. So we're going to get into some of the life lessons and the unfolding of Venus in Pisces in this episode. Okay, so let us begin. And we're going to start with lesson number 1, what this transit is trying to teach us, which is about learning unconditional love. I'm going to take a short break and I will be right back. Okay, that was a necessary break. Back to lección número 1. All right, lesson number 1, unconditional love. Oh my God, this is so hard for human beings. We're such conditional beings. But we have to start here. In a sense, the environment of Pisces supports all of the Venetian functions. And we could say the highest manifestation of Venus in Pisces is to understand what unconditional love is. That is loving without differentiation and separation. It's almost like loving the others as one in themselves or like. It's like my partner would be no different than myself. We don't create these boundaries of this is your space, this is my space, this is our space. We're together. What hurts you hurts me. This is Venus in Pisces at its highest manifestation. Venus in Pisces wants the depth and the breadth of love. It wants everything to be merged as one. In a sense, Venus in Pisces is looking for a sense of oneness, wholeness. That togetherness is an expression of one. That's what it wants. And since the sign of Pisces is very vast and expansive, all of the Venus's significations want to have this expansive quality in their expression also. For example, when Venus loves in Pisces, it wants selfless love. It wants transcendent love. And it really desires others to merge with it and for itself to merge with other people. Again, it's like being that droplet of water that wants to merge with the ocean. It wants the ocean to merge with it and to just become one. And it's kind of funny when you talk to people who have prominent Pisces placements and when you talk about love to them, and if they're frustrated with it, one of the things that they'll say, one of the phrases that they use is that I just want pure love. And when you get into the depth of what they mean by pure love, they want this feeling that I am unified and I am one with another person and they're a part of me. I don't know, in a lot of ways, we could say that that Venetian Piscean love is about not asking anymore, what's in it for me? You know, a lot of people go into a relationship like that. It's like, what is the other person going to do for me? Are they fulfilling this criteria and that criteria? Love me more, give me more. These are conditional love, right? Venus doesn't want that in Pisces. It's looking for a selfless love where all of these weird me, you, there, here wants to dissolve all of these factors and wants to close the gaps because its aim is to establish that connection and that union. And in a sense, one of the great qualities of Venus in Pisces, when it does have its highest manifestation, this doesn't always happen with, even when you look at people with prominent Pisces, these are the things that they're actually struggling with to overcome so that they can have that higher expression of Pisces, which is to stop seeing other people's imperfection and flaws. Because these are the things that separates us from other people. It's like they do that thing. Who am so different from you. I can't deal with that. I don't have that. I see the differentiation. So it's trying to dissolve even the shortcomings so that it can merge and establish that unity, that union and connection. It's as if the lover and the beloved are becoming one. And with this kind of a love, if it can be attained, there's a sense of completeness and fullness. You know, a lot of times when we go into relationships, we fall in love, there's always that fear of what if the other person leaves me because of these imperfections. You might not even trust yourself that you might stay with the person because of some certain kind of a flaw that they have. There's always a separation between the lover and the beloved. And Venus in Pisces is trying to work through these and to overcome them so that there is no more differentiation between the lover and the beloved. It's just love. And you know, we can compare this to the archetype of Jesus, let's say. Like when we see Jesus on a cross, he is in absolute surrender. He accepts the will of his beloved, and his fate is determined by the will of the beloved. And who's the beloved is the Father, is God. And there is such acceptance, and there is such a merging that Jesus sacrifices his own will, for example, to the will of God to merge with it. I mean, it's this is very hard for a human being. Like when we look at Jesus archetypally in this sense, it's very hard for a human being to do this for another human being. We generally don't trust other human beings, even when we love them to that extent. It's very rare and precious love when another person feels like I can surrender to this other person. I trust them. You can put your well-being and the entirety and the wholeness of your being in another person's hands. Most of us human beings function like Venus and Virgo. We're constantly thinking about how things ought to be done, how to preserve this aspect of life that's separate from this, but keep the connections. This Piscean love is probably, if we think about exaltations and manifesting themselves in the real human world, the way that we experience, it requires a human being who has a lot of mastery. Or we can move away from this archetype of Jesus and look at look at all of Rūmī's poems. Pretty much the entire body of his work could be called a Venus in Pisces body of work. It very much has that signature in it. For example, in one of his poems, he says, and I'm going to quote here, so I'm going to read so I don't make a mistake. He says, "The minute I heard my first love story, I started looking for you, not knowing how blind that was. Love doesn't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along." So in this poem, Rumi is saying that the ignorant lover search for the beloved. But once when they're together, only to come to realize that they were always one, they were never separate. That Piscean love transcends separation between self and the other. It's like that droplet of water that was always merged in the ocean. The Venus in Pisces experience of love is something all-encompassing, limitless, and beyond all individual forms. It also emphasizes the dissolution of ego, for example. It does not strive for self-preservation. And in a sense, is similar to Rumi's poem, where he talks about unity and oneness. In many respects, Venus and Pisces love is what we idealize as human beings, but attaining it is very difficult. To love unconditionally, to love selflessly, to be willing to lose oneself in another. to dissolve one's own ego and identity in order to merge with the other. And all of it, one who can do this, they're dissolving the illusion of separateness. They're dissolving the world of duality and merging into that sense of oneness. And if we can love anything like that in life, we will have a glimpse of the divine, that backdrop that is existence in itself, in its full reality as consciousness and as oneness. You would start to get a feel for it. If you can love another human being like this, in loving that human being in this way, unconditionally, one can have a glimpse of, let's say, what some people call God, higher power, existence in itself. But it's not an easy thing to do. For us human beings, we come to this world even with the mechanism of differentiating ourselves from other people. So to overcome this and to get the kind of understanding that's needed to have that sense of connectivity that's merged is very difficult to do. And I guess in one phrase we could ask here, when Venus is transiting through Pisces, how can you love unconditionally? Without provisos, without stipulations, without constantly drawing this line of this is where you begin and end. And it's very funny because we live in a society that the prominent word is to set, or the phrase is to set boundaries, set emotional boundaries, set behavioral boundaries, constantly define where other people end and where you begin. So it's kind of this anti-Piscean kind of a feel, because Venus and Pisces trying to transcend this. But we got to set these boundaries in the human realm, because there are actually crazy psychotic people that if you don't set boundaries, their intent is not to merge with you either. Their intent is to destroy you and to engulf you and to eat you and to digest you for themselves. So this kind of self-preservation also becomes necessary, which is going to be highlighted when Venus is moving through the sign. Let us now cast our gaze on what this Venus retrograde could entail in terms of the kinds of themes that will bring to the forefront for us to see and to experience.